Open up a tab, grab a seat, and pour a pint. It's time for the Beer Guys Radio Show.
You want free beer? Go to the brewery.
Dedicated to the art, science, and enjoyment of craft beer.
Yo, what's wrong with the beer we got?
Now, here are your hosts, Tim Dennis and Brian Hewitt.
And welcome to the Beer Guys Radio Show. We're broadcasting from the Beer Guys Radio Studios in Marietta, Georgia. And this week, we're talking with Denver, Colorado's Crooked Stave Artisan Beer Project. I'm Tim Dennis, and with me, as always, is my good friend and co-host, Brian Hewitt.
Hey, Tim. Joining us today, we have Chad Yakobson and Troy Montrone of Crooked Stave. We're going to talk about brewing beers with Brettanomyces, barrel aging, and blending. And if we get our fill of wild and sour beers, maybe some clean beer talk, too. Troy, Chad, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
We appreciate it. Brian, you know what? You did something I've heard a few people do. You dropped the "and" in the middle of Brettanomyces.
Yeah, I know.
Brettanomyces. I've heard that a good bit, though. You know better, though.
I know it so well, I usually just call it Bret.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, again, thanks for joining us. We opened a beer here, and we kept it kind of mysterious before we started, but it's one that Chad, I think, kind of holds a special place for you. We're drinking an Orval over here.
Awesome.
Yes. So that beer kind of got some magic started for you. Is that right?
Absolutely. It really was the foundation, of breaking into Brettanomyces and the realization of Brettanomyces use in what I consider like commercial beer. Orval makes beer. They make a good amount of beer and send it around the world. And to have a beer like that isn't like all the other Trappist ales and has the Brettanomyces is foundational.
Yeah, I think it's one that maybe doesn't get as, kind of the old school guys still appreciate it, but I'm not sure these new kids on the block, I'm not sure they quite appreciate what it is there.
I haven't thought about that, but actually now that you're saying it, it's absolutely true. It's iconic to so many people, but it's taken for granted maybe, or just for some reason hasn't been passed on generation to generation for some reason.
Sure. And that's something, Brian and I talked not too long ago about. Not too long ago here in Georgia, if you wanted craft beer, most of it was Belgian beer.
Sure.
And we just drank a ton of it, but with the growth here and everywhere else, we're getting a lot more distribution here. We unintentionally forget some of these beers that we really loved a few years back,
Definitely. It was such an eye-opener when I first had this. It's Trappist. So I'm like, well, I know what the Trappists are. They're your quads, your triples and all that. And I had this and I'm like, hang on a minute.
The game has been changed, yes. Brian.
I'm like, how have I not known about this? So yeah,
absolutely.
It's definitely a great beer. It's really overlooked. What'd you get up to this week, Tim?
I had a good week. We had a big day for us last weekend, Brian. We released our Struzu collaboration with Reformation Brewery here in Cairns. Had a good time with that. Nice turnout there. Strawberry Yuzu Berliner Weiss that we had a good time with, and went over to BHB, Burnt Hickory Brewery here in Kennesaw, Georgia. Had a few beers there. And I'll be honest, Brian, I was pretty lightweight this week. Other than that, I did our can release and I went to Burnt Hickory, and that was about it. But you got into a little bit more, right?
Yeah, I did. I got tricked into going into a 3.5 mile hike. But at the end of that, I had some Irish pub food, and I had an unusual black and tan made with Orpheus Transmigration of Souls. It was actually not bad. It's a very odd combination. Really? I think we called it Dark Soul or something like that. Very cool. And that
Orpheus, that's a big IPA. So it's very
double IPA.
I wasn't sure, but that's an odd combination for black and tan.
It's unusual. I don't know if the cans were the freshest, so it might have actually been at an advantage for the cans not to be as fresh because it wouldn't have quite as much punch to it. I thought it was pretty good. It was unusual. It was very, very different. And then I spent all of Monday in jury duty, so that's
good.
Amazing.
Doing your civic duty, man.
That's right.
You got to do it. Absolutely.
The bar there, the beer selection is terrible.
Terrible at the courthouse.
Terrible. Yes. Yeah. Very hard to find anything.
Troy, Chad, anything interesting for you guys this week?
Oh yeah, tons of stuff for me. On my end, I have been neck deep in raspberries, blackberries, all sorts of delicious fruits that we have been emptying into our fooders and making exciting new beers that are on the horizon. Been making some really neat new recipes with Chad, and really been grinding all week long, and it's been a great week thus far. And I know Chad's week has been exponentially full.
Yeah, absolutely. Chad, what's been on your plate this week?
Week to week as it goes. Man, I'm trying to even think from today. Every day changes. No, one of the really exciting things was being up in Fort Collins yesterday speaking on a seminar panel on sensory, and then popping over to our new location where our tap room's being built. Yesterday was really day one of build out. So we're in demo phase. So that's amazing getting to see some of the demo happen.
Yeah, you guys are growing quite a bit here recently, right? So you got to keep all the beers brewing, build out a new tap room. So never any rest, right?
Never.
What's that?
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yes.
I've never even heard of that.
I've heard
word.
the term. I'm not sure what it means. Absolutely.
Well, Tim, I think it's time for the beers of the week.
Crack open a cold one. It's the Truck and Tap Beer of the Week. Craft beer and food trucks in downtown Woodstock. Truckandtap.com.
Well, Brian, as always, we've got a very good selection here, and thanks to Crooked Stave, they sent us some very nice beers. We enjoyed their Von Pilsner as our pregame brew today. We're also going to get into their IPA and the Rosé. We also, Brian, you brought an Origins, a Nightmare on Bret, and a Batch 200, correct?
Yes, and I think all of them are several years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got a good Crooked Stave selection for this Crooked Stave show. It should definitely be good. Now, Brian, what's happening this week in the news?
What's in the news? The beer guys have the scoop.
Extra, extra, read all about it.
Time for headlines.
Okay, the big news this week seems to be that 6 Point has been acquired by Artisanal Brewing Ventures. Artisanal Brewing Ventures is the holding company that formed in 2016 with the merger of Victory Brewing and Southern Tier. The specifics of the deal were not disclosed, but as a result of this deal, 6 Point will gain access to Southern Tier and Victory brewing facilities. So the future of 6 Point's production is under review. Currently, a number of their beers are actually contract brewed in Memphis, Tennessee at a brewery named City Brewing Company.
Okay.
It's pretty interesting.
It'd be interesting. You know, I didn't realize till reading the article today that Artisanal Brewing Ventures was ABV was their name.
Yes. Oh, I didn't even think about that.
There
Yeah,
that's yes.
That's embarrassing. I didn't think about that. So, Tim, do you remember when we talked about it being a virtual certainty that there would be 7,000 active breweries in the U.S. by the end of the year?
I do recall that. That was like a month ago.
Yeah. Well, as of October 31st, there were 7,082 active breweries in the U.S.
That's something.
That's 1,100 more breweries than the same time last year, and that's according to Bart Watson, the economist for the Brewers Association, as reported by craftbeer.com.
Well, that's when we had Bart on the show. I believe we were like 100 or 70 something away from that. So that means in about a month's time, we had another 100 breweries open across the country.
That's believable to make those figures.
Absolutely.
So another 2,000 craft breweries are on the way, and they're officially listed as, quote, in planning. So the question is now, how soon before we hit 9,000 breweries in the U.S. or even 10,000?
Crazy.
There's just no telling. It's interesting because the growth of craft beer overall has slowed a bit in recent years. I'm wondering if the growth in breweries will slow a bit as a result, or if it will continue to rocket up.
I'm curious to see, because we've had, I posted this news online about the breweries passing 7,000, highly divided in what public opinion is on this. There's too many breweries. There's no way this growth can continue. Again, with our conversation with Bart, he said there's room there. The way we're going to grow is going to change. And there's pockets that don't really have room for growth, but others that have plenty of room for growth. And then again, with the shift to more local drinking, we'll probably see more smaller breweries. So the volume of beer produced may not scale up proportionally to the number of breweries opening, but we could see a lot more of our little neighborhood breweries with own premise sales as a big focus.
And it would be really cool to just have every neighborhood have its own little brewery, and you just went there when you drink.
Absolutely.
As we've mentioned before, big beer can't catch a break, but we're hearing that big beer drinkers can catch a shard of glass in the leg. Apparently, there's an epidemic of exploding Corona bottles. The most recent victim was a California man who was badly cut and knocked unconscious by an exploding bottle and had to seek medical attention after the wound got infected. The guy in question was a retired lawyer, so this could get expensive for Corona, which is owned by Constellation Brands.
How does exploding bottle knock you out? I mean, that's some serious explosion. That's not a little bit of pressure. That's really blowing up.
A lot of concussion there, right?
That's crazy. Okay.
They're calling them hand grenades these days. So.
All right. Literally, I think that was in the article, right?
I believe it
went
was.
Off like a grenade.
Went off like a grenade.
You're listening to the Beer Guys Radio Show. We do need to take a break, but we'll be back right after this.
Craft beer forged with a reverence for tradition and new styles that start a revolution. Ironmonger Brewing. The brewers at Ironmonger Brewing pride themselves at being masters of barrel-aged, hoppy, and sour beers. They invite you to their tap room in Marietta, Georgia to taste and see. Also visit their barrel room for an intimate drinking experience with great live entertainment. Keep up to date on all things Ironmonger by liking them on Facebook. Ironmonger Brewing, establishing a new standard in craft beer.
We are Reformation Brewery, celebrating the reformer in you. Locally crafted within the renowned Etowah watershed of Woodstock, Georgia, Reformation creates yeast-forward brews full of aroma and flavor crafted to last. Come see us in beautiful Woodstock, Georgia, for a tour and tasting of unique brews that you can't find anywhere else. Reformation Brewery, set beer free. ReformationBrewery.com.
Follow the Beer Guys on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Well, I'm sure I'd feel much worse if I weren't under such heavy sedation.
Now, back to the Beer Guys radio show.
Welcome back to the Beer Guys radio show. If you missed an episode, don't worry. All episodes are available as a podcast. Subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and never miss a show. We're talking with Chad Yakobson and Troy Montrone of Crooked Stave.
Chad, we just opened your sour rosé beer. Can you tell us a little bit about this one?
Yeah, I mean, where do I start? One of the amazing things about it is starting with the package that you just opened. So you just opened a 100% traditional sour beer made only by traditional means, fully fermented in wood foeders, all fermented with whole fruit, and it's in a can.
In a can.
It's in a can.
It's madness.
And it is not pasteurized either.
That's something. That's not okay. That
got
is
the active microbes
Absolutely.
going, rocking and rolling in there.
I mean, that's still there might be a handful now, just about a year later or so, that we've started doing this that are starting to do it. But it is the first of its kind to ever be a true sour beer put into a can. It's a really big thing here at Crooked Stave. We don't do any kettle sour or anything like that. Everything uses the organisms, and all the organisms are alive to continue to evolve. And so, I mean, you're getting something that you might pay, $10, $12 for a 375 ml bottle, $20 plus for a, champagne cork and cage, and being able to get that in a 6-pack, 12-ounce format. That's something that really is kind of revolutionary that we look to do to set ourselves aside and also, disrupt really and play around with the wild and sour beer market to bring consumers in and show them this, if you will, wild side. And this beer, it's the best launching point for that.
Yeah, this is definitely an approachable, sour. And we talked a little bit, Chad, during the break that these rosé ales are actually quite popular, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Something we've actually been doing this for a few years now. And so I would say we definitely saw this coming and being able to do it. And people who are looking forward or looking to other places where there are consumer trends and things going on. The first brewery that I really know that did this is Jester King. And they did it by aging the beer, the wild beer, on top of raspberries they'd already used. And we did something then very, very similar. And it was kind of the 1-2 punch. Before that, there were no sort of rosé type beers in the market or anything like that. So it was a few summers ago. And we saw it do really well, but, they were really at a sort of a higher price point and everything and selling amongst all the other wild and sour beer. I think the huge success is bringing them to a price point where it's applicable to the consumer. And I mean, rosé you can't deny it's hot right now. You watch any movie show on Netflix or something like that, and there's some comment about rosé. It's pretty cool. The timing's awesome.
That's interesting that both beer and wine are kind of on the same page with that at the same time, with those flavors
converging
in there.
Yes,
absolutely.
So I'm curious, because I've seen this mentioned a few times recently, and I think a lot of it was with your stuff, but a few other places as well. What do you get out of aging beer on spent fruit as opposed to the fresh fruit? What's the difference there? I'm assuming you're still getting a lot of the flavor from the fruit that way, or what's the difference there?
Main thing you're going to get on fresh fruit is going to be the actual character of the fruit. It's going to be much larger, rounded taste and mouthfeel from that fruit. When you go second use fruit, you're going to get a much lighter fruit character and color as well.
Yeah. And that's, Chad, I'm assuming the beers you're talking about were H.O. Rubicide and La Vie en Rose from Jester King, correct?
Yep, absolutely. Those are them.
Yeah, and I tell you what, I'll be honest. I personally prefer La Vie en Rose to the H.O. Rubicide. It's has a little more drinkability, I guess, but there's still good flavor there. It's a fantastic beer.
As I recall, H.O. Rubicide was
intense.
It would take the
It's
enamel
intense.
off your teeth,
Yeah,
basically.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Chad, something that you may have guessed we wanted to talk about a little bit here, and I imagine this is something that anytime you talk to somebody, this is a heavy topic due to your expertise in this area. But we want to talk a good bit with you about Brettanomyces. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Well, that's something that, we'll start with the Brettanomyces project. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so I think to kind of put all this in perspective, especially as you were talking about, 7,000 breweries and all of that. So if we kind of, go on a trip down history lane, if you will, I think that's the saying, something like that.
Memory lane, history lane, some lane, avenue, boulevard.
So if you go back about 8 years ago or so, right in there, and really the Brettanomyces projects, man, this year might have been, it's 10 years old. So that's
okay.
Wow.
It's pretty awesome. There was only one other brewery in the country who was entirely focused on wood-aged sour beers, and that was Jolly Pumpkin. So pretty interesting to think that I would venture to guess there is at least 5,000 to 6,000 breweries that have made some sort of Brettanomyces wild sour beer now. And you go back 10 years ago, and there was one who was entirely focused on it, and there was about 8 total who had ever made a wild or sour beer. You're talking about New Glarus, Russian River, Lost Abbey, I guess just about Odell, New Belgium, Avery, Ithaca Brewing Company, Captain Lawrence. Yeah, that's
probably the lot of it, just about, right?
Yeah,
that's it right there. So the Brettanomyces project was really revolutionary because at the time, all brewing science, literature, and anecdotal said that you could not primary ferment with Brettanomyces yeast. Yet, I'd seen Russian River do it. I'd seen Lost Abbey do it in their collaboration with New Belgium. And Avery was working on a project as well. So really, what I set out to do was, rewrite brewing science saying yes, this is possible to primary ferment with Brettanomyces yeast strains and solely Brettanomyces yeast strains, but then also learn as much about it. I was fortunate to go to school up at Fort Collins at CSU. So drinking La Folie from New Belgium was secondhand. I love to tell the story that we would even pregame and drink La Folie before going out to the bars. So
that's some serious pregame in there.
Pretty fun. That was kind of that beer culture that we came from. And so I wanted to learn as much about wild and sour beer as possible, but it didn't matter how much just I learned. I wanted to be able to drink other people's, and I wanted to really, really be able to move wild and sour beer forward to where it is now and to that knowledge and experience, because there was so much mistruths really that needed to be changed and rewritten. So doing the Brettanomyces as my master's project and then putting it online made that information available to so many other people so that we can be at the place that we're at now.
Sure. And so you said that it's possible to primary ferment with Bret. Is it something that I always think about Bret being something that takes a long time and will chew through everything given enough time? Can you turn around a beer as quickly on some strain of Bret as you can with more traditional brewing yeasts?
Yeah, and that was the whole point of the research, was to see if you could do it in 28, 35 days. We have 2 Brettanomyces. We call them our Brettanomyces fundamentals. It's Colorado Wild Sage and St. Bretta, and both of those are 4-week beers with Brettanomyces.
Wow,
interesting. I didn't know you could turn anything around that fast. Absolutely. Now, do you know, Chad, or do we as a collective brewing industry know how many strains of Brettanomyces have been discovered?
Banked probably around 100 would be my guess. Both independent and commercial and laboratory, national yeast labs that collect strains and CBI in those, and in Belgium and Germany as well. Probably around 100. There's an infinite amount of different types. The genome to Brettanomyces is so complex that take Saccharomyces as an example. Saccharomyces cerevisiae, essentially brewer's yeast or ale yeast as we think about it, top fermenting. All those different strains, Chico ale yeast, Scottish ale yeast, this Trappist strain, that strain. those are all just Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So Brettanomyces bruxellensis alone is 5 to 10 times more diverse of a genome than Saccharomyces. So if you think about all the different strains there are right now, times that by 5 to 10 or infinitely more for Brettanomyces bruxellensis, let alone there's also Brettanomyces animalis, Clausini, or Custercianus, Nardensis, Nanus. So yeah, it's a world of yeast varieties, basically varietals out there of Brettanomyces that could be played around with.
I had no idea at all that there was that many. I knew there were several, but I didn't know it was quite that much. You're listening to the Beer Guys Radio Show. We do need to take a break, but we'll be back soon to talk more with Crooked Stave.
Are you thinking about opening a brewery in the Atlanta area? If so, take a look at the Park at Georgetown. This unique community will feature a collection of restaurants, as well as a craft brewery within the new J.W. Holmes luxury development, Dunwoody Green. Conveniently located less than half a mile from I-285, this enclave of restaurants will be the gathering place in Dunwoody. Krim & Associates, the developer of the Park at Georgetown, wants to talk to you. For more information, call Todd Semrau at 404-226-6526.
It's Brian and Tim, the Beer Guys. If you're like us, no lunch or dinner is complete without a pint or two of craft beer.
Which is why Truck and Tap in downtown Woodstock and Alpharetta are always on our list. Tim, why do they call it Truck and Tap?
Well, the tap part is easy, Brian. They've got 18 of them.
As for the truck part, that's where it gets interesting. Truck and Tap features your favorite Atlanta area food trucks daily, so that way you're getting a different menu every day.
Truck and Tap in downtown Woodstock, Alpharetta, and coming soon to Duluth in 2018. Truckandtap.com. Let them know that the Beer Guys sent you.
Follow the Beer Guys on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Next Friday is Hawaiian Shirt Day. So, if you want to, go ahead and wear a Hawaiian shirt and jeans.
Now, back to the Beer Guys Radio Show.
Welcome back to the Beer Guys Radio Show. I want to give a quick shout out to one of our great radio affiliates, Real Talk 93.3 FM in Tallahassee, Florida. Catch Beer Guys Radio on Real Talk 93.3 every Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern. We're talking to Chad Yakobson and Troy Montrone from Crooked Stave.
Chad, I have one more question for you coming back off of all this Brettanomyces talk and all these different strains and that. I believe it was Trinity Brewing out there in Colorado they called it the Magical Brettanomyces Tour. Are you familiar with that?
No, I don't think I've heard that one.
So they did a series of beers where it was just a single strain of Bret. They released, I think it was 8 beers, maybe 8 different strains, where they just use a single strain of Bret so people could see the different, the character that each strain produced. Have you ever done anything along those lines?
Yeah, I would say what really kicked off Crooked Stave that was done that I think even probably kicked off the idea for many of the different Bret beers people started doing was the Wild Bret series. So we based it off the color wheel. Again, this was back when there were 2 or 3 Brettanomyces beers total. And so, I wanted to play around with the idea of what is a Brettanomyces beer. If you say Pilsner or Porter or IPA, you have a preconceived notion of what those are. So what is a Brettanomyces beer? And I wouldn't exactly say that we know what that is today, but I think we have a better idea, which is great because that allows creativity and innovation to play in. And so our Wild Bret series, in order to build that creativity and that innovation into it, played off the color wheel. So we always call it the Roy G. Biv series, which is red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And so made different Brettanomyces beers, chose different Brettanomyces strains for sort of each one and that base to it to build different Brettanomyces beers with different ingredients and see what stuck. And what's really cool is that a few of those became full-time beers and even to this day still are. Wild Bret Orange turned into St. Bretta, and we still have St. Bretta in a can. It's one of our top sellers. So that's a great way to educate and kind of get those different strains out there for people to taste.
Yeah, I wasn't able to get all of those Bret Tour beers, but got a couple, and it was interesting to see, the extreme differences from one strain to the other there.
Oh, sure. So we've just gotten into your IPA. What can you tell us about that? Is this done with Bret as well, or is this one of your clean beers?
For lack of a better term, yeah, it's one of the clean beers. We tend to just refer to it as IPA. It's kind of funny when we say, oh, yeah, like it's clean. Then people look at us like, so the others are dirty?
The others are dirty.
Right.
Yeah, it's a term of convenience where we talk so much about Bret. So
yeah,
it lacks Bret as far as anybody intends it to be. So
yeah, no, we have a pretty amazing brewery. If you guys ever get the chance to come out and visit, we've really built 3 breweries inside of one, completely ran by quality. It's amazing. So as you walk through, we can call it the attention to detail tour. You'll see separate sets of equipment of every single kind for every single beer. So we separate green clean, so the non-Bret, non-bacteria beers. Then we separate Brettanomyces from the clean and from the bacteria. And then we have the mixed culture. And so the Bret ones have basically the color designation of black, and all the sours have the color designation of red. And it's every fermenter, every gasket, every pump, every hose, every sight glass, every valve, every sample pour, the transfer lines, the bright tanks, the kegging equipment, everything, no stone unturned. And so it's a pretty immaculate and well thought out concept. And the training that, everyone goes through, that Troy passed on to his team and everyone works with is pretty amazing. So we have still never, I think we're going on nearly 3 years, 2.5 years with, almost 3 years actually, with never having a single misinoculation, infection, anything you want to call it.
Are you near your barrels there where you can knock on them quick?
Knock on barrel, yes.
Yeah, they're very close. They're right
there
over.
You go. Little knock on wood, huh?
So I know that you're not a fan of the clean the term clean beer, and I've also heard that you're not a fan of terms like horse blanket and barnyard as flavor descriptors, Chad. Why is that?
Just think about, going out to the nice pastures and bottling up that delicious aroma and flavor and then drinking it. Barnyard is just not something you want to drink. There's some people who've told me, oh, when I think of barnyard, I think of hay and such. And I'm like, no, that's hay. When I think of
that's
horse blanket, that's for anyone who's ridden a horse before. That horse just sweats underneath the saddle and urinates. And that's pretty much what a horse blanket is. It's like piss and sweat. And I don't know, but last time I checked, that's not really what I'm into drinking.
How about feet? Because that's a term that I hear, cheesy or feet sometimes, with especially with mixed fermentations or spontaneous fermentation.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all characteristics that you should stay away from. Probably not safe to drink, that's for sure. And those characteristics. Good Belgian beer does. Let's be more specific. Good spontaneous beer from Brussels and from that area doesn't have that characteristic. It's clean, it's citrusy, and really nice. So we really look to accentuate the positive characteristics in beer. Just like IPA, you don't want your IPA to be all skunky and onions and garlic and all that characteristic.
I've had that beer.
I have as well. I've made that beer.
Yeah.
Yep. And then you learn how not to make that beer. So that's the good thing. And that's the same thing with Brettanomyces. Yes. We really look to accentuate citrus, tropical fruit, the what we find to be quality attributes of Brettanomyces yeast strains.
Troy, we would like to talk to you some about cellaring there. So for those that don't know, what does a cellarman do? What's the purpose of a cellarman?
Cleaning.
Cleaning? That's job duty number one.
Number one, cleaning. No, cellaring, I mean, you're really in charge of that beer. I mean, you're the one transferring the beer. You're going to be the one, if that beer, picks up any dissolved oxygen on its way to the bright tank, if there's any discrepancies, once it actually gets carbonated, you're going to be the one that individual goes back to and kind of has to answer what went wrong in that process. So cellaring, you're in charge of everything from transferring to cleaning to making sure each individual part is set up correctly. And it is a huge, huge task here at Cricket Stave.
I saw a quote online where someone says that wort is made in the brew house, but beer is made in the cellar. Do you think that's an accurate statement?
I would absolutely agree with that.
So you're probably the real hero at Crooked Stave. Is that right?
I would say my team are all the real heroes here. Without them,
Fair enough.
I could not do what is possible.
So you talk about like spikes in dissolved oxygen. I'm thinking barrels. How do you avoid like more dissolved oxygen getting into a beer? That seems like you're kind of inviting that, right? I mean, that seems...
There is micro-oxygenation inside of all wood. You just can't avoid it. It's just keeping your barrels, topped up, making sure that they're in the right environment. Here in Colorado, we don't have too much humidity. So for the wood, sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it can be a negative thing. But that's also where we come in. We'll spray the barrels, spray the foeders down so the wood stays swelled, so the pores don't allow as much oxygen to get inside. And then once we transfer the beer out of the barrel or out of the foeder, we always purge our lines completely with CO2 for a very long time to make sure that there is no oxygen inside of those lines.
Okay. That makes sense. You mentioned being in Denver, and I read an article from Stan Hieronymus talking about hop usage at high elevations and that. So I know that the percentage utilization on hops at higher elevation is lower, but are there other challenges you face being in Denver with maybe in the cellaring process?
Evaporation.
For me, it would have to be, biggest would be evaporation.
Okay.
That
being drier in the higher elevation.
Big
higher.
angel share.
Yeah.
Or is it devil share?
Yeah, and
Yes.
Makes sense.
It's not as large as when as y'all know, I come from the woodlands, and being from the South. And when I came out here, I thought that, the angel share would be very, very large, but it is not as large as what I thought it would be.
Okay. Gotcha. Interesting stuff. You're listening to the Beer Guys Radio Show. We do need to take a break, but we'll be back very soon with more from Crooked Stave.
Looking for a great way to promote your business? CedarStream has what you need. For apparel, stickers, signs, and banners, we're your one-stop shop. There are never any art fees or setup fees. And if you need your items quickly, there's no additional charge for rush orders. Whether you own a brewery, bar, bottle shop, or other business, CedarStream is ready to serve you. Visit cedarstream.com for more info or call 800-686-7488 for immediate assistance. CedarStream. We print America.
Craft beer forged with a reverence for tradition and new styles that start a revolution. Ironmonger Brewing. The brewers at Ironmonger Brewing pride themselves at being masters of barrel-aged, hoppy, and sour beers. They invite you to their tap room in Marietta, Georgia to taste and see. Also visit their barrel room for an intimate drinking experience with great live entertainment. Keep up to date on all things Ironmonger by liking them on Facebook. Ironmonger Brewing, establishing a new standard in craft beer.
Follow the Beer Guys on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
Now, back to the Beer Guys Radio Show.
Welcome back to the Beer Guys Radio Show. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/beerguys. Patrons get some cool perks like Beer Guys swag and commercial-free episodes. We're broadcasting from the Beer Guys Radio Studios at Marietta, Georgia, and we're talking with Chad Yakobson and Troy Montrone from Crooked Stave.
Troy, we would like to talk to you about all your barrels and foeders and wood vessels that you have there. So you use a large variety of all of these types of vessels, correct?
Absolutely.
And some unusual woods. I know French or American oak is pretty common in there, but what are some other woods that you make use of?
We have one cognac foeder. We have some brandy barrels. We have the SOP barrels. We have sherry barrels. We have, we have a ton.
About how many barrels do you think you have on site there or across your facilities?
20. So off the top of my head, it's like 27 foeders, 500 wine and whiskey barrels. Yeah, 75 punch-ins, and then almost 100 more bourbon barrels of clean, like Imperial Stout.
Okay. Now, Troy, I don't think we've mentioned it on the show yet. We got to know you when you were here in Atlanta. You worked for Sweetwater at their Woodlands, their barrel aging and sour facility there, wild facility.
Yes.
And we were fortunate. We were there as the foeders started moving in and that. But what is the advantage to fermenting beer in foeders?
The variety of flavors that you'll get from the oak. I mean, I love fermenting inside of foeders, and especially mixed fermentation inside of foeders, not necessarily just doing, a clean beer inside of foeder.
That's because the wood or the foeder itself kind of picks up its own culture. So when you add the beer to it, that foeder has its own character that it imparts. Is that correct?
Yes. Each foeder is its own individual character and taste.
It builds its own neighborhood of bacterias and things like that. So I'd seen on social media that you had some cooperage display or demonstration events. Are you guys building? What happens? Are you building barrels in front of people?
That's going to be my lead salesman, Ryan Lambert. And so we'll get barrels in. And if we look inside the bung hole in the barrel and we see any crystal formation or any blisters or anything like that inside of the barrel, we'll actually pop the heads off, get inside of the barrels and actually scrape them down and clean off inside of that barrel and then put it back together.
What does crystal formation imply? What's happening there?
That's going to be from wine.
Yeah, it's essentially a precipitate from the wine that's kind of left. At the same time, you get that sometimes in bottles of wine as well. You'll see it. And it's left inside, and you really want to get that compound out of the barrels.
Okay, interesting. I know everything can leave its own character there, do different things to the wood. Now, Troy, we talked a little bit about you just had an interesting project, or you have one coming up doing an interesting spontaneous beer. Is that right?
Yes. Chad has allowed me to do all 100% spontaneous fermentation to where I will do I've got it down to about an 8-hour brew day with a 3-hour boil using all whole leaf aged hops. And then we pump the wort up into our cool ship. We'll let it sit overnight. And it's really neat the way Chad has designed this brewery and the fact that at the brew house, the whole top of the brew house is actually Colorado oak. So all the organisms from that oak kind of fall down into the wort overnight and collect, and then we pump them over into punch-ins to start spontaneously fermenting.
So with that, I think you had mentioned that you use Colorado malts in that too, right? Locally sourced malts. Are the hops locally sourced as well?
Yes. One is going to be from Colorado Malting Company, and another one is going to be from a malting company called Genie, and we're using that for the pale malt.
Okay. And you'd mentioned that this is a double concoction. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so pretty much I will basically mash all the grain in, and then I run off a certain portion into our kettle. I'll heat that up and then send it back over on top of the grain bed, stir the grain bed back up, and then run off that same amount again, and basically step that up to a higher temperature, send it over to the grain bed. And each time I'm basically stepping the temperature of the grain bed up, extracting different starches, extracting different sugars. And then I'll do our main runoff, sparge really hot. And I'm basically doing that to do what you don't want to do in brewing, and that's to strip tannins off of all your grain.
So, Chad, question for you. You mentioned something a little bit earlier. We were talking about flavor descriptors in the beer and the horse blanket, the cheesy and that. And you made a comment that Belgian beer doesn't have these, doesn't have these characteristics. Is there a big difference in the beers, made in Belgium in this style and in the American beers made in that same style?
Yeah, I think there are some people who probably won't agree with that. And they're like, oh my God, I've had Belgian beer and it's got this character in that. I think if you look deeply at it and you have more Drie Fontaine and you have more Bone Goose, and especially if you have them over in Europe, you kind of taste them and can get to appreciate more of that citrus rind type characteristics that you get from it, not concentrating on the cheesy and all these kind of negative aspects. And when you kind of look at them for the positive character that they are. So it's kind of on that. Then the other is just, with the amount of experimentation, I think the best way to put it is the saying trial and error, right? And it's called trial and error, not trial and success for a reason. And so a lot of people really just throwing darts at the wall, if you will. And, some beers that turn out really funky and get really wild. And sometimes the consumer in America is maybe a little more obsessed with the more aggressive and the more strange. And I don't always think that's better. And I think that's kind of a big aspect to it.
Why do you think that is? Why is the extreme so much more appealing over here versus, I would assume is more subtle characters and say, your Belgian spontaneous is?
Well, I just kind of think that's our culture and kind of our society, and probably part of, wanting to experiment, wanting to try different things, but also being open to new things as well. So, more willing to try stuff. So I think all those things are really great at the same time and build a great part of our culture that's exciting.
Sure. Yeah. So where is the industry now? I mean, when you started, there was almost no knowledge of Bret and what it does, really. There was, some tribal lore, I suppose. But where is the industry at now with its knowledge of Bret? Is there still a lot to learn? Or are we pretty close to having a very rounded understanding of this yeast?
I think there's an okay base for, a handful of brewers who do what they do consistently. From a knowledge standpoint, I mean, I would still say it's very young, but I also think that our knowledge of Saccharomyces, especially as brewers, is really young as well. That's just maybe even part of the brewing industry a little bit. So, I think we're in a nice place, but still just scratching the surface with so many things.
I hope this makes sense, but is there anything about Brettanomyces that we know we don't know? Yeah, right.
Like a stumper.
I mean, you kind of go along the lines sometimes of ester formation, and for example, if your water has a certain amount of bicarbonate inside of it, that could produce different esters that we don't really know about yet.
Okay. All right. Well, but before we let you go, I figured I had to jump in here and mention that you have a recent beer release, the Coffee Baltic Porter, and I was curious about that. I love coffee and beer, but I don't think I've ever seen that in a Baltic Porter. Why go Baltic with that?
I love Baltic porters. Porters are nice, but I find them to be maybe a little bit dry sometimes. The Baltic Porter and our Baltic Porter really is like the Danish version of Baltic porters. I love Baltic porters that are brewed in Denmark. And there's a handful of breweries here in the U.S. who really kill it with their Baltic porter. And so the softer, complementary characteristics you get from lagering, essentially a porter, having a little bit bigger base to it, just creates a really nice, smooth, rounded beer. And then, playing around with coffee is getting to branch out in beverage and other artisans who are making a high quality product from amazing beans from around the world, and getting to play with those flavors, which, lend into the Baltic Porter itself. So that sort of Danish stint for that Baltic Porter is a well-rounded beer that I particularly love.
It's a coffee beer, so Brian's going to mention it.
I'm into it.
Absolutely.
I have had Baltic Porters before and I have enjoyed them. I didn't have a very full understanding of the style.
Okay. Yeah. Well, now you know more, Brian. You're learning every day here, man. Learning every day. Well, Troy, Chad, thanks so much for joining us, guys. We really do appreciate it, you taking your time to talk to us here. If folks want to find out more about Crooked Stave or find where to come visit you, what is the best way for them to do that?
I would definitely plug checking out crookedstave.com for the website. It's got tons of information on our Cellar Reserve membership, on the beers we brew, and also links to Instagram and other medias like that, which are super easy to get on and see what's going on and update it to the minute, really.
Excellent. Sounds good, guys. Thank you very much. That about wraps it up for this episode of the Beer Guys Radio Show. Coming up next week, we're talking with Duclaw Brewing's head brewer, Brandon Stanko. For more craft beer info, follow us online. We're Beer Guys Radio on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Make sure to subscribe to the Beer Guys Radio Show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcasting app. Thanks again for tuning in. Have a great week, and don't forget to drink local. Cheers.
The Beer Guys Radio Show on the Beer Guys Radio Network. BeerGuysRadio.com.